Hi everyone. Part four of the wolf recording. There'll be five in total, so we're almost there. Um, so in the last one, Wolf talked about what she referred to as the fulfillment view, which is basically the idea that um, perhaps meaning can be derived just from pursuing our passions. However, she found this sort of wanting because uh, this doesn't delineate between passions that we would identify as worthy and passions that are unworthy. Okay, and so um, this now brings Wolf to her next uh, attempt at explaining, or looking at it. Probably not her attempt, but this brings her to looking at a different view of how to develop meaning in one's life, uh, which is the larger than oneself view. Um, she'll very quickly move on from this larger than oneself view uh, by saying that, well, surely uh, that alone is not enough. Um, and most of this reading will be focused on what she's referring to as the bipartite view. In other words, combining the fulfillment view from the last recording and the larger than oneself view. Perhaps if we just have both of these present in our life, this is enough to give us meaning. Wolf is going to be disagreeing with this and saying that it's crucial for both of these elements to actually exist together simultaneously uh, for meaning to be derived. Um, I can't just have both present in my life but independent from each other. Okay, they must coexist. Um, so it's a bit of a longer one, so let's get stuck right in. Pens and highlighters at the ready. Firstly, the larger than oneself view. Okay. That second view tells us that the best sort of life is one that is involved in or contributes to something larger than oneself. Contemplation of the case of Sisyphus should, however, be enough to show that this larger must be understood metaphorically. We may, after all, imagine the rock Sisyphus is endlessly pushing uphill to be very large. So the larger than oneself view is not to be taken literally. We don't have to dedicate our lives only to things that are bigger in size than oneself. We might rather understand this view as one that recommends involvement in something more important than ourselves. Something, in other words, that is larger than ourselves, not in size, but in value. Uh, so this Wolf is saying this might be the way to understand what we mean by larger than oneself. If the recommendation is to be taken as a criterion for a meaningful life, however, I would be inclined to argue against this interpretation too. So Wolf disagrees with this idea of larger meaning more important. For one thing, we assume that the value of one person's life is as great as the value of another's. It would seem to rule out the possibility that a life devoted to the care of a single other individual, a disabled partner, for example, or a frail aging parent, or a child with special needs, could be meaningful, for the value of the one cared for is presumably just equal to and not larger than the value of the person who does the caring. So there's some problems with this because, as in this view, that perhaps larger means more important. Because as Wolf was pointing out here, well, we would assume that one life is equally important than another, and that one life doesn't necessarily have more importance than another. And so the the issue that Wolf is raising here is, well, perhaps this means that, uh, what this would mean, sorry, is that dedicating your life to the care of another person, whether that be your child or your parent or whoever, um, would mean that uh, this can't possibly be something that brings meaning in your life because, well, that person's life is not larger than in terms of more important than yours. If anything, it must only be equal to yours. There seems to be a problem with this. I mean, most people would argue that dedicating your life to assisting your your child with special needs uh, can certainly provide meaning to your life. So there seems to be a problem with this idea of more important than being larger. When we try to assess projects and activities that are not principally aimed at the benefit of one or more human beings, the difficulties with such a view appear even more serious. So, if we even if we say, okay, well, maybe it doesn't apply to humans, does it apply to pursuing passions that don't involve other humans? Well, this becomes even more difficult to justify. Presumably, a dog is not more important than oneself, though some would disagree. But what about two dogs or six? And what about projects and activities that are not directed towards promoting anyone's welfare at all? Is philosophy, though I would argue that is designed to promote welfare, or poetry or basketball something larger than oneself in value? It is difficult to know exactly what the question is asking. A more promising interpretation of the view that links meaningfulness to involvement with something larger than oneself takes the metaphor of size less seriously. According to this interpretation, the point is to recommend that one get involved with something larger. According to this interpretation, the point is to recommend that one get involved not with something larger than oneself, but rather with something other than oneself. Okay, so this is the view that Wolf is going to be saying is a bit better. That is, with something the value of which is independent of and has its source outside of oneself. So this is an important idea, that the value of the passion must exist outside the subjective perspective of the value. This is what allows it to give meaning. Okay, so if you remember in the fulfillment view, just playing video games 24/7 might be valuable from the subjective perspective, but it is not valuable from any objective perspective. Okay, um, whereas uh, what Wolf is saying is it must be valuable outside of that subjective perspective. Okay. Um, Presumably, Sisyphean stone rolling has no such value. So this is Sisyphus rolling the stone constantly, doesn't have any value. Nor, it seems, does pot smoking or Sudoku solving. But devotion to a single needy individual does satisfy this condition as much as devotion to a crowd. Philosophy and basketball appear to meet this criterion too, since the value of these activities, whatever it is, does not depend on one's own contingent interest in them. Okay, so whether you value it or not, philosophy is valuable. Okay, this isn't based on your unique subjective experience of it. It is just valuable. Okay, all right. So uh, this is So Wolf has defined the larger than oneself view as being involved in something other than oneself, where the value of that item is not dependent on your perception of the value of that item. The value of the item exists outside of your perception of it. Okay? But this is alone is probably not enough, and the rest of this reading will focus on the bipartite view. So if we interpret the advice that one get involved with something larger than oneself in this way, it might be thought to represent a second and independent criterion for a fully successful and flourishing life. Combining this advice with the fulfillment view, one might think yields a better bipartite conception of meaningfulness than either view taken on its own. So what Wolf is saying here is perhaps the key to developing meaning in our lives and therefore living a good life is to combine the fulfillment view, so pursuing our passion, and also the larger than oneself view, being involved with something where the value of it is outside of ourselves. Okay, perhaps it is in the coexistence of both of these things that we find meaning. Um, The fulfillment view directs our attention to a subjective component that a meaningful life must contain. But as the case of Sisyphus fulfilled, so this is where Sisyphus enjoys uh, rolling the boulder, in fact, it's his passion, led us to see, even a life that fully satisfies the subjective condition may be one we would be hesitant to describe as meaningful, if objectively that life were unconnected to anything or anyone whose value lay outside of the person whose life it was. So what Wolf is saying here is that um, the the case of Sisyphus fulfilled, as she explained in the previous, well, what we talked about in the previous recording, um, there's something missing from that. Okay, there's some sort of element that we would say is missing, which means that that life is not meaningful. Most importantly, okay. Uh, by conjoining the fulfillment view with the injunction to get involved with something larger than oneself, we get a proposal that appears to remedy the problem. So perhaps, by combining these, we seem to solve this problem. On the bipartite view, in order for life to be meaningful, both an objective and a subjective condition must be met. So this is important, connects back to what Wolf has talked about previously, that in order to be pursuing the good life, you have to sort of tick both a subjective and objective box. Okay. So a meaningful life is a life that A, the subject finds fulfilling, and B, contributes to or connects positively with something the value of which has its source outside the subject. So the person, the subject, needs to feel fulfilled. In other words, it needs to be the passion that they are pursuing, and it needs to be something the value of which is outside of that person. So, the value is independent of them. If, however, meaningfulness is understood to refer to a coherent dimension of value more specific than the general category of self-interest, or even more general category of all that is desirable in a life, it would be puzzling if it turned out to depend on the satisfaction of two unrelated conditions. So what Wolf is going to be talking about here is, well, the bipartite view seems to be endorsing the idea that you can be pursuing your passion and that this sort of accidentally or unbeknownst to you fulfills a value larger than yourself, or sorry, not larger, outside of yourself. But this seems a little bit strange that these two crucial elements of life, of developing meaning in life, would exist in such an independent way. Wolf is sort of implying here, surely they would, you would need to have an understanding of both of them simultaneously. Uh, you can't accidentally stumble into one. Uh, as we read on, hopefully this becomes a bit clearer. The proposal I favour, which identifies meaning with a condition in which subjective and objective components are suitably linked, conceives of meaningfulness in a more unified way. So important here, Wolf is going to be arguing that it's not enough for both of these things to exist in our life for it to create meaning. They must actually exist simultaneously for our life to have meaning. Consider, oh, sorry, I didn't quite get up to there, did I? Uh, so besides, if we really consider the two conditions of meaningfulness proposed by the bipartite view as criterion to be taken separately, it is not clear that they contribute to the goodness of a person's life at all. So even if you have both of these existing, but existing separately, it's very unclear whether your life is actually any better, which was the idea from the start. Consider again the suggestion that a life in which a person contributes to something larger than himself, suitably interpreted, is more meaningful than a life that serves only the needs and desires of the person whose life it is. I introduced this idea in answer to the question of what desirable feature might be missing from a life like that of Sisyphus fulfilled, or the pot smoker or Sudoku player, that prevents it from representing a life we would want for ourselves, or for those we love. Okay, so kind of repeating her point from the previous recording. Um, okay, so how did we get here? We got here by identifying the Sisyphus fulfilled example, but uh, and identifying that there's something missing from that life. Okay, there is something. Uh, yeah, there's something missing, and we need to be contributing to something larger than ourselves, for it to really count as meaning. Uh, we could add stipulations to these examples that guarantee that the protagonists' lives and activities did contribute to something, to some independent value, so some value other than themselves. If they had no interest in the external or objective or independent value with which their lives were involved, however, it is not clear that that involvement would make their lives any better or more desirable to them. So if they didn't understand the value, like the external value of their pursuit, whether it had an external value or not, it's hard to say that they are knowingly leading a meaningful life. This is what, I sort of said before. It can't be accidental. You have to be sort of cognizant. You have to be aware of the value which you are adding to, which exists outside of yourself through your pursuit of your passion. So these two things must exist simultaneously, according to Wolff. Imagine, for example, that unbeknownst to Sisyphus, his stone rolling scares away vultures who would otherwise attack a nearby community and spread terror and disease. Or imagine that the pot smoker's secondary marijuana smoke is alleviating the pain of the AIDS victim next door. If Sisyphus and the pot smoker do not care about the benefits their lives are producing, it is hard to see why the fact that their lives yield those benefits, excuse me, uh, it is hard to see why the fact that their lives yield those benefits, that they contribute, in other words, to something larger or other than themselves, should make us any more inclined to describe their lives as meaningful, or to find their lives desirable than we were before we learned of these consequences. So if, Sisyphus rolling the boulder, if he doesn't care that the boulder is scaring away the vultures, well, yeah, is he contributing to something larger than himself? Well, yes, he's protecting a town of people from, disease spread by the birds. But he doesn't care about that. Would we really say that this adds something to his life? Like, it is ticking the second box of contributing to something larger than oneself. But if he doesn't care about it, then, does this really count? Is sort of what Wolff is saying here. And she certainly thinks that the answer is no. Uh, Even when we consider people whose involvement with something larger is less accidental, the contribution this makes to the quality of their own lives is limited at best if they are not emotionally engaged with the people or things or activities that make what they are doing valuable. I do apologize. I'm very tired. It's very, very early in the morning while I'm doing this recording. So, excuse me, please. People who do value, people who do valuable work, but who cannot identify or take pride in what they are doing. The alienated housewife, the conscripted soldier, the assembly line worker, for example, may know that what they are doing is valuable, yet reasonably feel that their lives lack something that might be referred to as meaning. So this, arguably, this is looking at someone who is fulfilling the larger than oneself, but without any passion for it. Um, so, the assembly line worker is always a good example. The work that they are doing is important. I mean, our entire lives revolve around products that, the only reason that we have them in such abundance is because of assembly line workers, because we figured out a way to use people to create these products quickly, and hence cheaply. So they're undoubtedly contributing something truly great, uh, something other than themselves, or the value of which is other. Um, but they probably don't feel that, after spending, uh, 13 hours sewing a Nike tick into a shoe. They probably don't feel like they've contributed to anything greater. Um, they might objectively understand it, but they certainly don't feel it. In any case, it seems to me that when the recommendation to get involved with something larger than oneself is offered, it is offered in the hope, if not the expectation, that if one does get so involved, it will make one feel good. The thought is that if one tries it, one will like it, and one will like it in part because of one's recognition that one is engaged with a person or an object or an activity that is independently valuable. So, uh, this idea is, that when people recommend to you, oh, you need to do something that contributes, something greater than yourself. The clear implication here seems to be that, well, they're talking about something, obviously other than myself. But what Wolf is saying, we're sort of implying that when we say this, that you should attempt to find passion in that pursuit. So go out and help someone. Who knows? Maybe you'll really like it. Maybe you'll find your life's passion in helping someone else. In this way, you'll tick off both the fulfillment view and the larger than oneself view, and that this will be created simultaneously in the one action. Okay. Um, and Wolf is saying that, that is what people really mean when they say you have to, contribute to something larger than yourself, something where the value exists outside of your perception of it. The hope when someone recommends that, and the meaning that comes from that in our lives, so what makes that action meaningful, is, that we end up kind of falling in love with that as well. Okay, we end up, finding our passion in that thing that contributes something greater. Okay, the footnote here is a good one about, uh, high school programs, where students have to complete community service. The idea here is that, you go and complete community service, and hopefully you find your passion in it, and you can pursue a life spent helping other people, and this would provide meaning to your life. But more often than not, it doesn't. Um, the suggestion then that one gets meaning in life through involvement with something larger than oneself may be most charitably interpreted as a suggestion that is not meant to be taken in isolation. Okay, so this idea of, um, contributing to something larger than yourself, what Wolf is saying here is we could charitably say that, well, the people who suggest this are knowingly omitting the fulfillment side of it, in the hopes that that's sort of obvious. Um, it is not to be regarded as a criterion of meaningfulness separable from any assumptions about the attitudes the subject will have towards the project or activity in question. So it seems that the mindset of the person completing these actions is actually quite important. Um, if one gets involved in something larger than oneself, or as I have interpreted it, if someone, in something the value of which is in part independent of oneself, then if one is lucky, one will find that involvement fulfilling. And if that happens, then one's life will both be and seem meaningful. If one's involvement brings, no such reward, however, it is unclear that it contributes to meaning in one's life at all. So get involved in something larger than yourself. Hopefully, passion is aligned with that. So hopefully you find your passion through that. And if this is the case, well, then it seems, at least, on the outside, it seems as though, you've developed meaning. However, if this mindset doesn't take hold, if you don't view what you are doing as fulfilling as well as it being externally fulfilling, then it is unclear whether you've actually developed anything good in your life, whether you're contributing to developing meaning in your life at all. Um, just as the objective condition sometimes associated with meaning, namely that one's life be involved in something larger than oneself, is much more plausible when it is understood to function in conjunction with a positive subjective attitude to one's involvement, so it seems to me that the subjective condition, that one live in a way that one finds fulfilling, is more plausible when understood in conjunction with objective constraints. Uh, I suggested a moment ago, so again, Wolf here is talking about mindset as being important. Okay, so what the subject is thinking, the way that they perceive their pursuit is important. Yeah, we can't be accidentally contributing to something other than ourselves. I suggested a moment ago that when someone recommends that you get involved in something larger than oneself, the hope, if not the expectation, that is lurking in the background is that you will find that involvement subjectively rewarding. So, in other words, you'll find your passion through that. Similarly, when someone recommends that you find your passion and go for it, there seems also to be a hope, if not an expectation, lurking in the background, namely that the passion you find, the pursuit of which will be fulfilling, will be an intelligible one within certain bounds. You will not be passionate, at least not for very long, about stone rolling or Sudokus, or caring for your goldfish, or making handwritten copies of War and Peace. Okay? So what Wolf is suggesting here is that when people recommend the fulfillment view, the unspoken or the implied uh, side of it is that they are also recommending the larger than oneself view, and vice versa. When someone is recommending the larger than oneself view, they are also implying the fulfillment view. So if I say to you, go and find your passion, the implication here is, but make sure that it is something that contributes to something of value outside of yourself. That's the implication that I'm saying. All right. You know, if you're really passionate about dealing drugs, well, that's not what I meant. That's not what I was implying. Okay. So when I say go out and pursue your passion, we mean something that is objectively valuable. When we say go and contribute to something greater than yourself, where the implication here is that go and contribute to something greater than yourself, and make that your life's passion. Okay, find the sense of satisfaction and joy that is derived from that. That's the implication that we get from that statement. Okay, so Wolf is sort of saying that both of these views actually advocate her point. They just do it implicitly instead of explicitly. And she's saying, well, we need to be explicit if we want people to understand how to have meaning in their lives. All right, last part of this reading, back to Sisyphus. So this is sort of the bipartite Sisyphus example. In my earlier discussion of Sisyphus Fulfilled, I expressed sympathy with those who, unlike Richard Taylor, found something desirable missing from Sisyphus's life, despite his being subjectively quite content. So remember, this is Sisyphus who now is pursuing his life's passion by rolling the stone because of something that the gods put in his veins. And Wolf is saying, even if that's the case, there still seems to be something missing from this example. Okay, something important as well. Excuse me. There is room for an even stronger disagreement with Taylor, however, that I want to consider now. Specifically, one might wonder whether the transformation that Sisyphus undergoes from being unhappy, bored, and frustrated to being blissfully fulfilled makes Sisyphus's life better at all, one might think that it actually makes his situation worse. So this is sort of a step above. Wolf isn't just saying that it doesn't make his life better to enjoy rolling the stone. She's actually now going to the extent of saying, well, it may actually make his life worse to enjoy rolling the stone. Okay. From a hedonistic perspective, of course, Sisyphus's transformation must make his life better. So remember hedonism, the view that sort of pleasure is the pursuit of the good life. Well, he now gets a sense of pleasure out of it. So it absolutely it must make his life better. For the only changes in Sisyphus are subjective. Negative feelings and attitudes are replaced by positive ones. So this ticks the hedonist box. And remember, Woolf argued that this view is incorrect, so she's disagreeing with hedonism. Negative feelings and attitudes are replaced by positive ones. From a non-hedonistic perspective, however, these changes come at a cost. When I try to understand the new Sisyphus' state of mind, when I try to imagine how someone might find stone rolling fulfilling, I can only conceive of two possibilities. On the one hand, I can think of the substance in Sisyphus's veins as inducing delusions that make Sisyphus see something in stone rolling that isn't really there, so he has to be delusional to enjoy this. On the other hand, the drug in his veins may have lowered his intelligence and reduced his imaginative capacity, thus eliminating his ability to perceive the dullness and futility of his labors, or to compare them to other more challenging or worthwhile things that, had the gods not condemned him, he might have been doing instead. So Sisyphus, to enjoy and argue that it is his life's passion to roll the stone or boulder up and down the hill, well, up the hill, it rolls down the hill by itself. Wolf is saying Sisyphus has either got to be delusional, so actually not perceiving the truth of what he's doing, or he's kind of got to be an idiot. He's got to he's got to think that there's value in something that is objectively futile, so absolutely valueless, and that this, he actually believes this, that he compares rolling the stone to saving lives. He compares rolling the stone to contributing to, literature. This is sort of what Wolf is saying would need to be present for Sisyphus to argue that it is his life's passion to roll the boulder. In either case, Sisyphus is in at least one respect worse off than he was before his transformation. He is either afflicted by mental illness or delusions, or diminished in his intellectual powers. So either he's mentally ill or delusional, or, as I said before, sort of a bit of an idiot. His intellectual powers have been diminished. Opinion may divide over whether, all things considered, the transformation makes Sisyphus's, makes Sisyphus worse or better off. Those in strongest sympathy with Mill's claim that it is better to be a human unsatisfied than a pig satisfied may think that, however bad the fate of the classical Sisyphus, the fate of the transformed Sisyphus is worse. So remember, John Stuart Mill, we talked about him in the last recording, argued that it's not enough to simply pursue pleasure, but we need to understand that there's a qualitative difference between pleasures. Intellectual pleasures are to be pursued over and above pleasures that are more, I guess, base. And Mill sort of put this as, it's better to be an unhappy human. So it's better to have the capacity for intellectual pleasures, but for that not to be fulfilled, than it is to be a happy pig. A pig has no ability to pursue intellectual pleasures. It can pursue great base pleasures, rolling in the mud and etc., etc. It might feel great satisfaction from these actions, but this is not to be confused with something of, sort of value. Um, and so Mill is sort of saying it's better to be intellectual and suffering than it is to be an idiot, happy. And it's quite clear that Sisyphus would have to be an idiot happy, um, in this case. Others may conclude that since Sisyphus is condemned to roll stones in any case, it is better for him to be happy with, or more precisely fulfilled by, his lot than otherwise. Even those who hold the view that it is better to be Sisyphus happy than Sisyphus unhappy, however, may agree that it is better still not to be Sisyphus at all. So, you know, some people would respond to this saying, well, yeah, but Sisyphus has to roll the stone. This is his inescapable fate. Surely that's better. Like, it's better that he enjoy that than that he doesn't. And, we would say, well, yeah, okay, if those are our only two options, yes, but surely it's better again to not be Sisyphus. Like, if I have the choice of being Sisyphus rolling the stone and hating it, being Sisyphus rolling the stone and it being my life's passion, or not being Sisyphus at all and not being condemned to rolling a stone, surely that third one of not having to roll the stone is the important one. Sorry, is the one that we would argue is best. Okay. To me, the first scenario in which the transformed Sisyphus is deluded seems a more plausible way to understand what it would be for Sisyphus to be or to feel fulfilled by stone rolling. For fulfillment seems to me to include a cognitive component that requires seeing the source or object of fulfillment as being, in some independent way, good or worthwhile. So, she's arguing that it would be hard for Sisyphus to be sort of an idiot, to be, um, stripped of his intellectual powers, and still because fulfillment is more than just enjoyment, remember? It's not just pleasure, it is something greater than that. So it seems that fulfillment is implying that we have to see the source of our fulfillment as contributing to something independent of ourselves. Um, in this case, Sisyphus is fooled into thinking that he's contributing to something which is, uh, which has value independent of himself, but that is not actually the truth of it. Even deep and intense pleasures like lying on the beach on a beautiful day or eating a perfectly ripe peach would not naturally be described as fulfilling. To find something fulfilling is rather to find it such as to be characterized or characterizable in terms that would portray it as objectively good. Okay, so uh, to achieve fulfillment, as I said before, we would have to see it as being something objectively valuable as well. So the delusion is not just making Sisyphus enjoy rolling the stone. It's actually making him think that he's doing something of real value as well. Imagine Sisyphus in terms of either scenario, however, can explain why he might hesitate to describe. Sorry, let me start again. Imagining Sisyphus in terms of either scenario, however, can explain why we might hesitate to describe the life of Sisyphus fulfilled as meaningful. And similarly, I would argue why we would withhold that label from the life of the fulfilled pot smoker, goldfish lover, or Tolstoy copier. Imagining these characters on the model of either scenario would, in any case, help to explain why we might regard their lives as far from ideal. Either I suggested that we might judge these lives to be missing something, a phrase that suggests a feature separable from fulfillment, that these lives lack, rendering them less than optimally meaningful, if meaningful at all. In light of our discussion, we can now see that even the apparent condition of meaningfulness they do satisfy, that is, the condition of being fulfilled, is in a certain way defective and less desirable than fulfillment stemming from a more fitting or appropriate source. So, Wolf is really sort of tying off what she said at the end here. So even if we have a life of fulfillment, and even if we we perceive that that life of fulfillment is contributing to something larger than ourselves. This does not in itself create real fulfillment. Okay? Real fulfillment is when the value of our life's passion is actually larger than oneself. Not just perceived to be, but actually is. You are actually adding value in a way that is greater than you. Okay? All right. End of recording 4. I wish I could go back to bed, but I have to get ready for work. One more to go, recording 5. It'll be a long one, because the 5th section goes on for a bit, but it's where Wolf will really be supporting, well, and particularly defending, as we can see on the page, her view that meaning in life is derived from being fulfilled by something that is fitting. So in other words, something that is worthy of being pursued. Okay. All right. Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you next time. Bye.